The new Feltyrosa finally got revealed, and although it's not as flashy as the other ones, it is still a really solid upgrade for the current Feltyrosa build.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we've got a relatively short episode as we only got the Feltyrosa cards to talk about, as well as a brand new triple R for Keter Sanctuary, but their skills are relatively simple to digest, which makes it that we don't have to go into much depth of what these cards can do and how they interact, and probably also has to do with the fact that I'm not too familiar with most Feltyrosa cards, so I probably am not the greatest to highlight all the intricate interaction combos as we did with the previous one for Black Wings and White Wings. But with that said, let's jump straight into these cards, and we start off with a brand new grade 1 Feltyrosa, which is Night Sky Scaring Divertimento or Trut. And Trut is of course a ghost, but this grade 1 has the effect OverTrigger circle. At the end of the battle, this unit boosted. If you have a Vanguard with Feltyrosa's card name, cause counterblast 1 and put another rearguard in the same column as this unit into your soul and draw a card. So this is quite useful for multiple reasons. First off, it clears the front row, which means you can potentially multi-attack with Feltyrosas on attack skill or drive check skill. That's a great thing. It also allows you to turn cards into draw engines, as you can refund certain cards, but it also generates soul, which is great because certain other skills uses soul. But the other application of this card is the fact that certain cards have skills that put them on the bottom of the deck. And maybe you don't want that, maybe you want to get more value of those cards, so this is a great way to get additional value of those cards. And there is a third application to this effect, or fourth, or whatever number it is, but there's another application, but we will talk about that once we take a look at the new Feltyrosa. But before that, we also have a brand new grade 2, which is Traumery of Grazing Hands, Roswitha. And Roswitha is of course a ghost, and this grade 2 has the effect, when the unit is placed on a rearguard circle other than from hand, if you have a Vanguard with Feltyrosa's card name, stand all of your rearguards in the same column as this unit, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So I believe there is another card for the Feltyrosa build that does a similar effect that resend the whole column, and I believe there's also a booster that resend itself. So this is basically just another way to just pump more numbers, especially on your multi-attack, which the bigger numbers definitely matter at your later attacks. But then it also has the effect, rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, you may have this unit get power plus 5k until the end of the battle. If you do, at the end of the battle, put this unit on the bottom of your deck. So this is what I meant with the grade 1 we just talked about, that you can potentially get more value, as now instead of putting it on the bottom of the deck, you can put it in soul and get more draws and more value of your skills. Now, in combination with this first ability, it could get an additional 10k power, so it could be a 20k beater that has a booster, which is great. And the grade 1 we just talked about isn't once per turn, so you could potentially use the grade 1, put something to soul, draw a card, then you recall this thing, you reset the grade 1, and at the end of the battle you do the skill again if you have to counterblast a spare for that, which honestly is pretty decent for a draw engine and just overall value engine to be had here. And this could work with anything, so it makes it quite flexible, which is overall just great support for Feltyrosa to have. But then we have to take a look at the new Feltyrosa, and then things start to click even more, because we have this Feltyrosa, Rondo of Plenilune Feltyrosa. And she has here, of course, the dress-up effect that is Rondo of Evertide Moon Feltyrosa, aka she is the same Feltyrosa, so you can persona ride and use skills and whatnot. But then her unique effects are, continues a Vanguard circle. During your turn, if your soul has a grade 3 card with Feltyrosa's card name, all of your front row ghosts get power plus 10k. Now keep in mind, she's not a ghost, she's a vampire, so it's your rearguards that get more power. This is great, especially on your turn 4 place, to make things even more threatening, because you get your persona ride numbers, but now even more numbers on top of that, and seeing as your rearguards are also ghosts, in the multi-attacking, those units also get more power. So this continuous skill essentially is like 40k power to the field if you can generate 2 extra attacks, which isn't too unlikely. So that's honestly pretty good. Now you can say it's relatively slow because you need to have a grade 3 in your soul to get this skill, but if you remember, the grade 1 allows you to put things into the soul. So you could essentially have a Feltyrosa rearguard in front of the grade 1, attack with it, put the soul, and now the skill will activate, so you get that 10k power buff a turn faster. This is a way to potentially set that up, which is nice to have this type of synergy plays that you could have. But this is just extra padding on this skill. We also have the main effect, which is basically a different version of the original Feltyrosa, as it says act on Vanguard Circle once a turn, cost counter +1, and until the end of turn, this unit gets auto Vanguard Circle once a turn when your drive check reveals a ghost, normal unit, or a grade 3 with Feltyrosa's card name. You may call that card to an open rearguard circle. If you call the card, this unit gets drive +1 until the end of the battle. Twice. So this is very confusing with the fact that twice is at the end, but essentially what it means is that you get the auto once per turn skill twice. So you can use it essentially twice. I don't know why they just not decided to change this skill and just make it twice a turn. It's just a simple number change, but for some reason they have to go this route. I don't think it's too hard for people to imagine, like, hey, we have a once a turn symbol, and a twice a turn symbol means you can activate the skill twice a turn, but that's beyond the point here. Essentially, what it means is that you pay the counterblast preemptively during the main phase, and then if you drive check a normal ghost or Feltyrosa, you can call to the open rearguard circle and you get a drive check on top of that, an extra drive check. This is a bit different than the original skill, because the original skill is that if you drive check a ghost, you can just call it and then you can counterblast 1 to get an additional drive. So you can decide to counterblast or not if you have the resource for it, but the calling is essentially free as long as you have an open front door circle. The advantage of this one is that it also activates with Feltyrosa rearguard, so you can call those and potentially then interact with the grade 1 and put soul and get the power buff. But basically you have more hits to achieve multi-tech essentially. But it will cost you more resources, as you need to invest at least a counterblast to even activate the ability. So there's like positives and negatives downside to this one in contrast to the original one, and the original one has definitely upsides and downsides to contrast to this one, because of the fact that how these skills interact. Because yes, the original one is free, but it will cost you more counterblast down the road if you want to get the extra drive checks. This doesn't, and potentially gives you more pluses over the long course of the game, but there is a chance that if you use counterblast and you see nothing, you just wasted counterblast for absolutely nothing. And if you don't have the counterblast to spare for using this effect, that means you also cannot even activate the effect. So damage denying, this deck becomes more damage deny sensitive with this new Feltyrosa in contrast to the original one. So keep those things in mind here. But overall, this package of Feltyrosa looks really interesting. Of course, having more Feltyrosas is always going to be good for more consistency. The persona red numbers is something you're going to need in order to achieve maximum value of your multi-attacks, but this new Feltyrosa also being able to potentially call the grade 3 Feltyrosa just increase the consistency of your deck, and the power buff is nice for a finishing turn or potentially some cheeky early game setups if you are able to put it to soul and do something like that. Now that means you have to make a decision in order to say I either play the original one or the new one in my right line. Keep in mind that playing the original one means that you don't have to have counterblast in order to get potentially multi-attacks, and with this new one you do need to have counterblast in the early game. So that will probably change the way how you guard early on, seeing as you need more resources up front instead of the original one that doesn't need it. But if you go with the new one, you can potentially go with the cheeky play of putting a Feltyrosa in the soul early on to just get massive power numbers on your very first grade 3 turn, and as soon as it doesn't require your opponent to be at grade 2, this could be quite devastating. Now, talking about something that's quite interesting and talking about numbers early on, we have a brand new triple R for Keter Sanctuary, which is in line with these new OT cycle-like cards we've seen for this set. So let's take a look at this one for Keter Sanctuary, as we have this grade 3 Divine Knight of Deeply Laid Stratagems, Sayes. And Sayes has the effect, continues a rearguard circle, guardian circle. If your opponent drive check or damage check reveal the trigger unit this turn, this unit gets power plus 10k and shield plus 10k. So it's essentially the same skill that we see with the other ones to negate a trigger to some extent, because either you can beat over it or you can get the extra shield to combat that for one battle, which is nice to have. But again, sadly, it doesn't have intercept, so you cannot call to the field and then intercept away with it. I wish these cards had the intercept ability to just make them more viable, but sadly that's not the case. Overall, it's a nice bonus to have, but it's not the main selling point of this card, because we're going to talk about its main effect, which in this case is auto rearguard circle. Once a turn, when this unit attacks, look at the top card of your deck, put it on the top of your deck or into the soul, cause counter +1, and perform all of the following. Choose one of your opponent's power 14k or greater Vanguard and increase this unit's power by that unit's power until the end of battle. Cost, remove an overtrigger from drop, choose one of your other front row units and it gets power plus 15k until the end of turn. So there's quite a lot of going on here, but first let's take a look at the initial fact that is free. It is a check your top deck and either stack a trigger, an important card, or get free soul. This is honestly already pretty decent for some builds. Like this could work in the Pope deck, this could work for Hexorb Sorceress, this could even work for like something for Bastion because it's a great free, and this can set up your top decks as well. Like it's relatively generic, it can see some plays in those particular decks and maybe in some of the others. Which in itself, in my opinion, is already pretty decent as seen as it's free. But then for a counterblast, this card can negate any defensive play or any defensive trigger, including the overtrigger, which is really good because essentially if your opponent is getting a defensive trigger, this card will always force at least 25k shield from your opponent. The reason for that is because you get their power, so it's their power plus the 13k base, plus the 10k power of its continuous effect because they got a defensive trigger, so that will then activate. So it's a 23k number on top of their base power, which means that's 25k shield you're demanding of them. Which is great because it means for one counterblast, you're at least forcing either a PG or 2 cards, including something like a front trigger that's 20k shield, or like a trigger plus another 10k shield something. So I think that's a decent trade for one counterblast, especially if you're in the late stage of the game where card advantage matters a lot. So this is a great way to cross the gap in those situations. And then the additional bonus of getting another 15k on top of them or removing overtrigger is just a cherry on top that can help you to power up your board even further. But then again, it depends on the scenarios, because if the first part of the effect activates, that means your opponent got a defensive, so that plus 15k is less significant unless it's like on a resender or it's your final push turn and you really want to make those attack matters, so that 15k could help you to get over that part. Now keep in mind, what I refer to as it costs 25k shield on your opponent's side of the field only applies if they achieve the 14k or higher threshold if they got it via a defensive trigger. If your opponent has like a defensive play, like via Men's Bruce for example, this is a different story because it could be at 18k without needing a trigger. Then the skill will still activate, but then instead of demanding 25k shield, it's just 15k shield because of 13k power on top of their base power. But with it said, that's basically everything that we got today. Not a lot of new reveals, as we only have like the new Feltyrosa cards and the new Triple R, but interesting cards to talk about and interesting things to discuss, because the Feltyrosa ride line upgrade, in my opinion, is less clear cut as we've seen with the Black Wings White Wings strategies, or with like what we saw with Willista, which is a direct upgrade of everything and it's very obvious how you use this. This new Feltyrosa is a bit more trickier in my opinion, as you need to really look to the card pool that they have to get maximum value and to decide which direction you want to go, as there's upsides and downsides to each version over the other, which means it's a bit harder to justify certain cards being played over others, especially which type of quantities in your build. So there's probably a lot more theory crafting around Feltyrosa than one of the other new ride line upgrades. And as for this Triple R for Keter Sanctuary, it's an interesting card. It's quite generic. It has its application to certain ride lines, not so much to others, but I can see this thing being used to some extent, as it is a way to negate defensive triggers, and of course the overtrigger in those scenarios where it comes up, where you try to seal the deal and to close the game. This card is able to make those turn enders or final turns more consistent, and a great way to combat those scenarios. But that's basically my thoughts on these cards. I want to know what you guys' thoughts are and opinions on these cards are. So let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below on what these cards can do. Is there a specific build you really want to try these cards out, or is there a specific interaction for Feltyrosa that I completely overlooked, as again I'm not too familiar with these cards? Then let me know in the comments down below, as probably a lot of other people might be very interested in those particular aspects and those sides of the story here. So let me know in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've missed a time leap. And I'll see you guys in the next one!